Normally on Noble Caledonia trips I'm talking about plants and the native vegetation of the various places that we visit. So to give advice about gardening is a different matter altogether. Every garden is different and every gardener's approach is different. But one piece of advice I would suggest is that you visit as many gardens as you can to get your ideas, bring them home, but don't expect to get the same results. Instead, enjoy the process of trying them out. Now, we are very lucky as Noble Caledonia staff to see lots of gardens around the world, and we learned something from each one. One of the first times I sailed with our lovely Pamela Lenoury, we called in at Mount Congreve down in County Waterford, 70 acres of magnificent garden containing thousands of different species of different plants. The custodian at that time was Ambrose Congreve, and he had a terrific attitude towards gardening. When he had a delivery of plants, several container loads arrived, I think from South Africa. The gardeners say they were disappointed to see so many of the plants were dead. But as they got to the last container, there was one plant alive at the back, and Ambrose said, "Fantastic, one is alive." So I think that's a great lesson in gardening, to keep that nice, buoyant attitude and perseverance. He lived to be 104, so I think he got a lot of pleasure out of life and his time on earth, and he certainly did enjoy his gardening. Now, on the last trip we did before lockdown, we passed through Singapore, and always as I go through there, I'll call in at the magnificent gardens by the bay. There is the 3-acre greenhouse there, the Flower Dome, the largest in the world, designed by British architects Wilkinson Eyre. And there's always a magnificent display of something there that takes a lot of man-hours to lay on. And it's fabulous. You see some terrific things. But high-tech, 50 million people have visited there since 2012. Fabulous place. But towards the end of that tour, we called in at a tiny island in Vanuatu called Uri Parapara. It's only 9.5 miles in diameter, a nice circle with the waters broken through into the former caldera, making it a horseshoe shape. The people there are some of the happiest I've seen in the world, and they were delighted to see us and played some, she'll be coming round the mountain when she comes, on bamboo tubes whacked with flip-flop soles. But anyway, the point was, they showed us a couple of gardens. One of them was had been tended to by the local children, and they had cleaned the beach beautifully. There wasn't a speck of litter anywhere, and arranged a map in shells and stones and all sorts of vegetation to show us what the village layout was. And beyond that was a fern garden where they had lovingly placed conch shells with hibiscus flowers. They'd made turtle shapes in the sand, again with stones and shells. There were carved faces in tree fern stems, and what else was there? A leaping fish that looked like a marlin. But the whole thing was so beautifully done. The children had enjoyed doing it, and they looked at us with their big eyes, and they weren't shy, but they were modestly expecting to see how we reacted. And you could see that they really enjoyed the process of what they'd done. And as I say, my suggestion is to look at as many of these different approaches as you can, and like those children, enjoyed the process of doing it, no matter what the results, and bring those ideas back to your own garden. I'm on my knees here amongst the tubs and pots and things because I want to share a few thoughts about growing plants in containers. Now, a container can be anything from a thimble through to a welly boot, a dustbin, a huge stone trough carved with bas relief motifs on the outside, as you might see at a stately home. But it's anything that contains a medium for growing a plant, and a plant pot is probably the most familiar. We use it because it gives us the illusion that we have a little bit of control over what's going on. We know what medium we put in there, what plant or seed, nutrients, and we know the amount of water going in. So it gives us that element of control. But containers also are useful, give us some flexibility in where we can place the plants. In the winter time, bad conditions, we can keep them indoors and bring them out when the season is right. And if you've not got too many, you can nip them back in again when the storm is brewing. Another thing, you can place where you want so they're aesthetically pleasing, and something like this strawberry, when it's ripe and the fruit is ready for picking, you can put it in a nice place for the grandchildren to pick the berries. Isn't that a nice thought? Now, another thing, it gives us decorative opportunities. When plants are not quite ready, such as these Livingston daisies, they'll give us a beautiful display, I'm hoping, later on when we get a bit more sunshine. But in the meantime, isn't that aesthetically pleasing? Something that reflects your own character, or that of my wife maybe. Also, plants have their good time. We've had a great year for tulips. These are some of the remnants, but as they get towards the end, they're not that attractive, but you can turf them out and bring on the next lot of plants to enhance the display where you want them. Pretty obvious stuff, this, I guess. The other thing is, maybe you've got a hot spot or a particular favoured place where you have your gin and tonics on the veranda. So isn't it nice to be able to place the plants when they're at their best in that nice spot? Also, you can impress the neighbours, scare them to death, or give them a little bit of pleasure as they walk past. There are problems with containers, of course. Ceramic ones, they can break if you're a bit clumsy. The plastic ones deteriorate in the sunshine and eventually get a little bit brittle. So the material itself is a bit of a problem. But hey ho, if you can afford a big stone one, fantastic. Lasts forever. From the plant's point of view, there can be problems. Everybody will have seen this if they've tried growing plants for too long in a container. They get root bound, spend a lot of energy going round and round trying to seek a little bit more substrate to exploit. So that's just some of the little difficulties that you can have with them. And watering is a problem too. The smaller they are, the more often you have to pay attention to them, making sure they're watered, especially on hot days. My sister-in-law has 90 pots, and I often think about her on a hot day when she has to water them of an evening. Quite a task, and she's also got my brother to look after. Right, now, here's another idea. If it's not for aesthetic reasons you're wanting to grow vegetables in containers, you can use your conventional pots and so on, or these cloth bags are a pretty good idea too. You can get a substantial plant in a pot of this size, and this here is the growing part. This is harvesting the sunshine. That's the chemical factory doing the work to produce the food for us. The root size isn't necessarily as big, it doesn't have to be as big as the foliage. So these, when the plants are small, you can pack them tight together. As they start to mature and need more space, move them along a little bit. Isn't that a nice bit of flexible handling that you can do? Another thing too, I'm seeing roots here just poking out. They don't do that problem of getting root bound in a solid pot. With these, once they reach the air, they will perish. So it doesn't waste a lot of time looking for more space. You get a better root system, more concentrated. So I'm told. Let's see what happens with this one. Also, if you're trying to save the planet single-handedly by trying to grow your own food, you can possibly get one meal out of a bag that size by optimizing the use of space. So it's a thought that you eat 3 or 4 meals a day. There are 300 and odd days in a year. You need 1,000 of those to feed yourself. Good luck. Okie doke. You can get more substantial bags for growing potatoes in. This canvassy one. That's an early red Duke of York, I think. They're very handy too. You add a little bit more medium, roll it up as the plant grows. Saves a lot of back-breaking digging. Wonderful tips. So that's 2 sorts of container. I'm going to step up one more size and show you these here, which are 70-litre tubs. If you can see the size of them, perhaps it's not so. I'm going to angle the camera a little bit to show you. This is the size here. They're made of a black rubberized material that is a lot more robust. You have a job to bust one of these, and it's a handy size for growing. Maybe you could get a meal for a day out of one of these, 3 meals out of one of these, if you're growing vegetables. They don't need as close attention with watering. They can go a little bit longer than a small container, so it's a good size. Also, you can grow in it a plant that needs several years. This little ecosystem here will go for several years before it needs to be renewed. Needs attention in the meantime. So you could do something like a tree, which I do, and that will stay in there for several years until it's ready to face the outside world, outside of the fence. In the meantime, you can grow radishes in there, get a little crop out of it. Now, one more thought about the watering. If you can sit these bags in a couple of inches of water, somehow arrange that. People go to a lot of trouble with float valves, piping and so on. If you can do that, that will sustain itself for watering. The roots will take just what they want. And for these bigger ones, I've got these in a trough, just wood, fastened with gravel paths between, a bit of builder's polythene, the damp proof course, to hold about 6 inches of water, and that will percolate by mysterious means to a height of 12 inches, and the plants can draw from that water table, as it were, when they're of a sufficient size. So they need a little bit of attention, but mostly they will look after themselves quite well. So there it is. A few thoughts on growing things in containers. I'm looking round. I've got alliums, I've got artichokes here, lilac, runner beans. There's also a gooseberry bush. As I say, you can let it grow for a little bit longer. And I always think that you could, if you're quite pretentious, grow this to a greater height and do a little bit of topiary. So you've got a movable tree that you can place where you want. It takes 2 people to lift it, by the way. And if on that occasion, when the Queen's car breaks down and you have to give her tea on the veranda whilst the men are fixing the carriage, you can put in a screen of instant trees. Give her shade and a little bit of privacy. Very handy thought. So I hope you managed to contain yourself whilst I was talking about containers.